When we talk about sexual energy, especially in the context of male desire, we often reduce it to something primal, raw, physical, urgent. But if you look closely, if you really pay attention to what's happening underneath the surface, you find something far more complex. A man's sexual energy is not just a biological impulse. It's a deep emotional tether, a direct route to his inner world, to the parts of him he often hides behind control, logic, or detachment. This energy, when activated, isn't simply about release. It's about exposure. Something in him opens, something in him softens, and that's where real influence begins, not by using sex to manipulate, but by recognizing that in moments of erotic arousal, what's most accessible is not just his body, but his vulnerability. You're no longer dealing with the exterior armor, the ego, the performance, the role he plays in the world. You're meeting the boy underneath the man, the one who longs to be wanted, to be seen, to feel significant in someone else's eyes. Desire becomes a doorway, not to control him in the crude sense of power games or withholding, but to speak directly the place in him that still feels unsure, still seeks affirmation, still wants to be chosen. Because here's the truth many never say out loud: most men don't just want sex. They want to feel desired. They want to feel chosen, and they often don't know how to ask for that in any other language except arousal. When you begin to understand that, your relationship to his sexual energy shifts entirely. You no longer see it as a tool to provoke a response, but as a signal of emotional availability. The moment he's turned on is the moment he's most open. He may not speak it, he may not even realize it, but his defenses drop, and he enters a state where emotion and sensation blur. And in that blur, the imprint you leave is lasting. That's why erotic power is so often misunderstood. It's not about technique, nor about seduction in the traditional sense. It's about presence. It's about understanding that your ability to influence him emotionally starts when you stop trying to change how he feels and start tuning into what he already feels underneath his arousal. Because arousal, in men, is never just physical, it's psychological. It's an expression of longing, of admiration, of being disarmed. He may chase you for the physical, but he stays for how you make him feel about himself. This is where so many people get it wrong. They think that in order to keep a man emotionally hooked, they have to perform, to please, to endlessly give. But what hooks him isn't what you give him in bed. It's what you reflect back to him about he is when he's with you. Does he feel more desired, more grounded, more free? Does he feel like more of a man or less? Erotic energy amplifies those reflections. And so when a woman knows how to hold that space, not just sexually, but emotionally, she becomes unforgettable. Not because of what she does, but because of what she evokes. She becomes the mirror through which he sees a part of himself that is rare, soft, and alive. And here's what's fascinating. Most men don't get to access that part of themselves anywhere else. Not in their careers, not with their friends. Often not even with their families. This is where your presence becomes profoundly influential. Because in the privacy of erotic connection, when you recognize not just his arousal, but the emotion driving it, he bonds, not just to the act, but to you. That bond is not forged through dominance or seduction. It's forged through psychological attunement. Erotic intelligence is the capacity to read what arousal is really saying. And once you can do that, you begin to understand how sexual energy can be redirected not toward control in the manipulative sense, but toward deeper connection, deeper influence. You can guide his emotions without ever raising your voice. You can shift his mood, his tone, his direction, not by telling him what to do, but by grounding him the feeling that he is deeply wanted, deeply seen, and still, somehow, mysteriously out of reach. It's that paradox that keeps him coming back. The sense that you see him, that you know him, that you reflect his deepest erotic self, but that you are never fully possessed. You're never fully claimed. There's always something about you that remains sovereign, and it's that sovereignty combined with deep erotic presence that makes you unforgettable, because you're not clinging, you're not pleasing, you're not chasing, you're channeling. You're shaping his emotional state through your ability to hold the erotic charge with clarity and depth. And when a woman can do that, when she learns to his sexual energy not just to arouse, but to attune, she becomes more than a lover. She becomes an emotional imprint, one he can't easily forget, one who doesn't just take him to ecstasy, but brings him home to a version of himself he rarely meets. So if you're going to use his sexual energy, don't use it to control his actions. Use it to connect to his emotions, not to play him, but to understand him. Because when you understand him in the moment where he feels most open, you hold the key not just to his desire, but to his loyalty. He won't chase the woman who gives him the most pleasure. He'll chase the one who gives his pleasure the most meaning. We live in a culture that glorifies control. Control of self, control of others, control of outcomes. And when it comes to relationships, especially those laced with desire, we often confuse control with restriction. We're told to pull back, play hard to get, to create distance so that we might generate value. But let's pause there. What if influence isn't found in withdrawal, but in rhythm? What if it's not about denying the current, but learning to direct it? Sexual energy, especially in response not to rigidity, but to movement, it's fluid. It surges, retreats, builds, crashes, and rises again. To try to control it through stillness, through silence, withholding, or coldness is like trying to tame fire by locking in a box. It doesn't work. It either burns through the container or fizzles out. What ignites and sustains emotional attachment is not static tension but dynamic interplay. A woman who intuitively understands the rhythm of arousal, when to lean in, when to hold back, when to shift the energy, is not just desirable. She becomes unforgettable. This rhythm is not random. It's emotional intelligence expressed through erotic timing. Because here's what we often overlook: a man doesn't just want sex. He wants to feel alive. He wants intensity. And intensity is not born from constant access. It's born from contrast. The interplay of closeness and distance, of presence and pause. It's in this interplay that tension becomes magnetic. Think of it like music. It's not the notes alone that create feeling. It's the space between them. Seduction works the same way, not as a trick, but as a cadence. A pulse that draws him in, not because you've shut the door, but because you've learned how to leave it slightly ajar. When a woman can master this kind of emotional rhythm, she changes the atmosphere. She becomes unpredictable, not because she's erratic, but because she's attuned. She senses when his energy is rising and mirrors it with curiosity, not control. She senses when it's playful and adds just enough mystery to make him lean forward again. She's not playing a role. She's present, fully aware, and fully in touch with the moment. In that awareness, she becomes a conductor of experience. He doesn't feel manipulated. He feels moved. This is where we must shift our understanding of influence. It's not in the act itself. It's in the timing of the act. Anyone can give pleasure. Few can shape the emotional context around that pleasure. But those who can, they are the ones who leave a lasting impression. Because they are not simply offering sensation. They are curating experience. That's what men remember. Not just how you made them feel, but when. In what context, with what tension and release. And it's in that careful balance that emotional dependency begins to form. Dependency not in a needy sense, but in a deep psychological craving for the quality of connection you offer. He starts to associate you with a state of heightened awareness, of being pulled into something greater than himself, something he can't predict, something that feels alive. That aliveness becomes addictive, not because you're withholding, but because you are responsive to the moment, to the energy between you. That responsiveness is what makes you powerful. Too many people reduce seduction to strategy, but the most compelling seduction isn't manipulative. It's relational. It's rooted in understanding. A man doesn't want to be toyed with, but he does want to be surprised. He wants to be disrupted. He wants to feel the thrill of uncertainty, not in your commitment, but in your expression. And this is where many women underestimate their power. They become consistent to the point of predictability, loving but overly accessible, sexual but routine, and what's routine cannot sustain erotic charge. The women who keep men emotionally hooked are not the ones who give everything. They are the ones who know when to give and how to withhold, not from fear or manipulation, but from deep awareness of how energy works. They sense when to break the rhythm, when to switch the tempo. They are less concerned with being liked and more interested in keeping the dance alive. They don't freeze. They don't chase. They pace. They move in a way that evokes anticipation, not confusion. They turn foreplay into conversation. They turn touch into timing. And they let silence do some of the speaking. There's a reason men return to women who offer this kind of presence. It's not because these women look a certain way or perform a certain act. It's because they feel a certain way. Being with them is not a transaction. It's a journey. He doesn't just get what he wants. He experiences something he didn't even know he was missing. And once a man feels that, once he associates you with the aliveness of erotic rhythm, he becomes emotionally invested. He doesn't chase you because you're hard to get. He chases you because he can't find that feeling anywhere else. So if you want to influence a man emotionally, don't focus on taking away what he desires. Focus on directing it. Don't restrict the current. Learn to shape it. Create contrast. Play with tempo. Be deliberate in your presence and intentional in your pauses. Let your unpredictability come from attunement, not distance. That's how you lead the dance without ever looking like you're trying to lead. Because in the end, it's not your availability that keeps him hooked. It's your rhythm. And rhythm is the language of desire that never needs to beg to be heard. You said there's a moment, often overlooked, that carries more emotional weight than any climax, any build-up, any perfectly timed seduction. It's the moment after, the silence that follows the release. The emotional freefall that happens when the intensity fades and what remains is presence. This is not the part we glamorize. It's not what media sells us. But it's in this precise space, this quiet, unguarded space, that real emotional bonding happens. Because this is where his walls fall, not during the pursuit, not in the heat of desire, but in the stillness that follows. Men culturally and psychologically are conditioned to stay armored, to perform, to stay composed. But after sex, especially after deep, connected sex, there's a neurological and emotional shift that takes place. His body relaxes. His need to perform dissolves. His mind, momentarily unburdened, returns to a softer place. And in that softness, he becomes emotionally available. Not in the dramatic sense, not with declarations or confessions, but with presence, vulnerability, sometimes even confusion. And if you're attuned, if you know to be with him in that space, you hold extraordinary influence. You see, what most people focus on is how to get his attention, how to turn him on, how to heighten his desire. But what keeps him emotionally tethered, what truly anchors his attachment, is how he feels in the aftermath. That's when the nervous system reorganizes itself. That's when impressions get stamped. And if in that moment he feels safe, seen, accepted, grounded, he doesn't just associate you with sex, he associates you with home. This is where meaning enters the equation. The erotic charge can spark arousal, but it's the emotional safety that builds connection. When a woman knows how to show up in that vulnerable space, without judgment, without agenda, she becomes unforgettable. She becomes the one who didn't just take him to ecstasy, but who met him in the aftermath, in the rawness, in the silence. And this is the moment that most people rush past. We go straight to getting dressed, checking our phones, moving on. But if you can resist that urge, if you can stay just a little longer in the softness, you create something relationships never reach. Think of this as a kind of emotional imprint. After climax, the body is open, the mind is quiet, and the heart, often for the first time, is accessible. The performance drops, the bravado melts, and the inner child, the one who's often hidden beneath the armor, emerges. This is not the time for words. It's not about fixing or filling the space. It's about being, holding, feeling. That's what bonds him. Not how wild the sex was, not how skilled you were, but how deeply present you were when everything else went still. And here's where it gets more interesting. Men don't always know how to name this experience. They can't always articulate what makes one woman stand out over another, but they feel it. They remember how they felt in her presence. And if she was the one who allowed them to stay soft without collapsing, to be seen without being shamed, to feel exposed without being controlled, that memory stays long after the body forgets, the psyche remembers. Because this isn't about controlling his behavior. This is about shaping his emotional association. You're not trying to make him stay. You're becoming the place he wants to return to. And once you understand that the true influence begins not in the seduction, but in the emotional resonance you leave behind, your entire approach changes. You stop trying to force connection and instead focus on deepening it. This also means you have to be comfortable with intimacy beyond performance. You must learn to stay grounded in moments when he's unguarded, when he's unsure, when he's not offering the confidence or clarity you might be used to. Because in those moments, he's offering you something rare in access, the parts of him that don't get validated anywhere else. And if you meet those parts with warmth, curiosity, even stillness, you anchor him. Not because you gave him something, because you held space for what was already there. That's the paradox. True emotional control doesn't come from what you do. It comes from how you hold. How you hold him, the moment, the space. Because control, real quiet, psychological influence, comes from presence. You become the imprint he didn't know he needed, and he'll keep coming back not to chase the next high, but to return that sense of being met. So don't underestimate the space after climax. Don't rush to fill it. Don't turn away too quickly. Stay there. Breathe. Let him feel you not as a stimulus, but as a sanctuary. That's when the real work of emotional tethering begins. Not in the pleasure, but in the meaning that follows it. Because the women who master this understand something essential. It's not the intensity of the moment that makes a man fall. It's the depth of what remains when the moment is over.